Thank you. I hope your heart's in a holy place today. As Pat said, they had to go into the old folks' home and drag an old retired minister out to come fill this pulpit, but it's always an honor and it's good to be with you. I want to address the issue today of maintaining healthy relationships, personal relationships, and the challenges that go with that. And I'm coming to you to speak out of personal experience. First, as a married person, and second, as a minister who served 4 churches over 40 years of my ministry. So this is my personal experience. It may not align with your experience in marriage or in churches. That's okay. I'm just sharing mine with you and hope it might be of some help. First of all, in terms of marriage, I've been married 3 times. So I've learned something, often painfully, about maintaining a healthy marriage relationship. I'm glad to say Michelle and I have been married now going on 23 years. I said to her when we first got married in the first year, look, if this is going to be a successful marriage, you need to embrace your mistakes. And she came up and she hugged me. She's been embracing this mistake for 22 years. I've also said that she's been tolerant with me, but she says I only have 2 faults. One is I don't listen to her carefully. I can't remember what the second one is. So I've learned a lot about relationships, both personal relationships through marriage and relationships in the church. I want you to think with me about how do we maintain healthy, good relationships today.
Good morning, everyone. It's so lovely to be with you, and hello to everyone watching at home as well. Let's see. We take this moment to help one another grow into our values, to help each other learn. And so it's great to hear each other's guesses as to what might be in the Wonder Box. Not a lot of hints. I guess the hint is that it's not making much noise. It's not very heavy. Do you have any guesses as to what might be in here? A bear? Like a bear? Air? A feather? Seeds? Oh my goodness, does that fit in a box? I don't know if that would fit in a box. All right, I'm gonna open it up. And it is a flag. And we've had this one hanging outside already. And this one is called a Progress Pride flag. And it was designed in 2018 by Daniel Quasar. Quasar added the 5 colored chevron to the classic rainbow flag to place a greater emphasis on inclusion and progression. And the Progress Pride flag added the 5 arrow-shaped lines to the 6-colored rainbow flag, which is widely recognized as the symbol of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. And this flag includes black and brown stripes to represent marginalized LGBTQ communities of color, along with the colors pink, light blue, and white, which are used on the transgender pride flag. And so I've got a video for us today that talks a little bit more about what this flag represents and what we can do in our congregation to be more welcoming. So let's take a look at that.
We asked some people in our community a simple question: what will you teach the world? Here's Tristan from the Pride Center of Edmonton.
I'd like to teach people about gender identity and how to use pronouns correctly. First off, let's talk about the difference between sex and gender identity. Sex is something that is assigned at birth. When the medical professional says, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl," they are basing this off of your physical anatomy, or your sex. Gender identity is a person's experience of their own gender. Most people's gender identity aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth. The term for this is cisgender, from the Latin cis, meaning on this side of. Someone who is transgender, or gender non-binary, however, has a gender identity that does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. Transgender and non-binary people can experience their gender in a variety of ways. Some transgender people may identify strongly with a gender. Some may feel disconnected from masculine and feminine genders, while others may experience their gender as a combination of both. Here's a quick refresher on grammar. Pronouns are words we use to refer to someone in place of a name. Some are tied to a specific gender, like he, him, his, and she, her, hers. Others, like they, them, theirs, are gender neutral. Some transgender people will use gendered pronouns as they affirm their gender identity. However, some transgender and gender non-binary folks will use gender-neutral pronouns. It's important to consider that the pronouns that feel comfortable for one person might not be for another. Okay, so why is this important? You probably have an expectation about what pronouns people refer to you by, and so do most transgender or gender non-binary people. Using someone's pronouns correctly is important because pronouns correspond with a person's gender. When pronouns are used incorrectly, we may risk misgendering them. Misgendering is when someone uses the wrong name or pronoun to describe someone else. This can cause distress for the person who is misgendered because they may feel that their gender identity is not validated and respected. Misgendering can also create a risk to someone's safety by outing that person to others. Unfortunately, some people purposely misgender others to insult them. Using the correct name and pronoun is about showing basic respect. If you're not sure, you can just ask. A great way to ask someone's pronoun when you first meet them is to say your name, state your pronouns, then ask the person you're meeting with what their name and pronouns are. Hi, my name is Tristan. I use he, him, his pronouns. What is your name and pronouns? Hi, my name is Jordan, and I use they, them, theirs pronouns. Thank you for asking. Once you know someone's pronouns, you will know how to refer to them when speaking to others. Hey everyone, this is Jordan. They're a new friend of mine. We all make mistakes though. If you slip up, apologize, and try to avoid being defensive. Hey everyone, this is Jordan. He's a new friend of mine. They're a new friend of mine. Sorry, Jordan. No worries, thanks. Getting someone's gender right is on you, not the transgender or non-binary person. Try not to make assumptions about someone's gender identity. You don't know someone's pronouns until they tell you. Pronouns are something important that most people don't think about. However, pronouns are extra important to many transgender and non-binary folks as it affirms their gender identity. Using someone's correct pronouns is important and validating. It's easy to get it right if you avoid making assumptions. In the end, this all comes down to treating each other with a little care and respect.
Some great music. So St. Gabriel received welcoming congregation status, a commitment to LGBTQ plus people early in its history. And how are we continuing this commitment today? Our new minister, Reverend Jamie Yandel, is transgender and non-binary and uses they/them pronouns. One of the most loving and caring things we can do is to use a person's correct pronouns. Does that video bring up perhaps more questions than answers? Well, do not fret. We have a learning opportunity coming up through the Transforming Hearts Collective that you can sign up, and we'll pass those through, and Reverend Lou's going to explain a little more about that, and we'll have more information in the back so you can look into that. But one of the things I wanted to point out is my name tag, and I have my pronouns on it, she, her. And we use name tags all the time. So many of us have name tags on right now, and it's just a way to help us introduce ourselves to each other and a gentle reminder to others. So adding a sticker with your pronouns on it can help in the same way. So I have some stickers made up for you today. Would you mind starting those down each side of the aisle? We're going to pass these out, and the sign-up sheet. Selecting a sticker is completely voluntary. No one has to Ron, there's another one over here. There's one for each side. Here, let me help. All right. So you don't have to disclose your pronouns if you don't want to. So I invite all of you to help create the beloved community by trying our best, giving permission to correct one another, and being forgiving. Reverend Lou is preaching today about how we as a covenantal community promise to support each other in personal and spiritual growth, and that includes forgiveness as well. Promise making, promise breaking, and promise renewing. We'll talk more about that in RE time today. And I don't know if I see any children with us this morning, but I'm going to go outside, and hopefully a few are coming later today. Thanks so much for listening. You're welcome.
I will hope you caught within the little video that Karina asked us to watch just a minute ago the importance of checking assumptions in relationships. We all make assumptions when we meet people. We base them sometimes on experience, sometimes on our own value system, but we make assumptions. So I wanted to begin today by making sure I check out some of my assumptions that I brought with me here this morning about all of you. Here's the assumption I'm bringing this morning. I assume that all of you, with the possible exception of some of you who may be visiting or may have wandered in here off the street accidentally, I'm assuming all the rest of you here are in full agreement with this UU affirmation and this faith tradition that asks us to promote justice, equity, and compassion. That's the assumption I'm making. Do we need to vote on this? Or is that a good assumption for you to make? Can I get an amen? Amen. Okay, I'm assuming we all share this assumption. Let me also provide a little more disclosure about myself for those who do not know this. As has been said, I'm a Presbyterian minister of 4 decades. I've served congregations in Virginia, Dallas, Houston, and ended up in Austin, and that little congregation let me stay there 17 years so I could retire. During that time, 20 years of my ministry I've spent working within our denomination for the care and support of church professionals, meaning ministers and religious educators and church staff people, in all kind of contexts. Particularly, I was focused here in Central and South Texas, but I was on part of a larger team that was across America, from the East Coast to West Coast. We were dealing with issues from large, huge churches down to very small congregations that are about to die out. Urban context, suburban context. Lots of different kinds of belief systems within the larger Presbyterian church. And it's only been in the last 10 years that I'm no longer a professional church junkie like I was, in that I don't have to deal with maintaining a church institution anymore. But I know a lot about churches. I have a lot of experience and stories to share about what makes a healthy church. From my experience working with churches, large, small, all different times, I have come to affirm this old parody about one of Jesus' sayings. It's a parody, but it has some truth in it. The parody goes like this: where two or more are gathered in my name, in the context of Jesus, the church, when two or more are gathered in my name, somebody's going to get their nose out of joint about something. And I found that to be true, even in the best churches. I'm sorry to break this news to you if you didn't know that already. Christian history itself is full of this history. You know, if you go back and you read the New Testament letters, over half of the New Testament is about letters written to churches. And if you read those letters, you will be astounded about the number of conflicts being addressed. So the New Testament itself is full of incidents and stories of congregations with the fledgling little church in its infancy were fighting over all kinds of issues with one another from the get-go. And then, of course, most of us know, even though the church got unified around beliefs and practices, it split in the 4th century between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. If that wasn't enough, you fast forward to the 15th century, another major fracture between Protestants and Catholics. And they hardly got going good as Protestants, and then they broke into a myriad of other groups and denominations because they couldn't get along. They had disagreements. They were disagreeing about things about how you practice communion, the Lord's Supper, which Jesus gave to hold everybody together. They couldn't even agree on that. And they got into arguments about who should be ordained and be church leaders and write doctrines about all kinds of things. Arguments and disputes are part of being in a community of faith, primarily because we hold all these things to be extremely important. If they weren't important, we wouldn't get much of an argument. I've discovered in my time the truth of this old joke about a man who had been stranded for 15 years on a remote Pacific island. His little sailboat crashed and he ended up being there by himself. He managed to find a way to fish and keep himself alive and took some of the palm trees and other things and built some structures there to shelter himself. And 15 years later, a freighter came by and they spotted a fire and they came closer and they sent a boat in and they found this man, been living there 15 years by himself. They were astounded when he was showing them around the little island, all these structures he'd built. He said, yeah, this over here, that's my summer home. I built myself a winter home on the other side. I built this little building over here is my restaurant. That's where I have all my meals. I go there. And he said proudly, and over there, that thing with a little kind of cross on the top, that's my church. And one of the rescuers said, after they walked around for a bit among all those structures, well, what's that one over there with a cross on it too? He said, oh, that's the church I used to go to. The point is, we always want our churches to kind of align with and reflect what we believe and how we want to do things. Sad to say, churches don't always live up to our ideals about even basic principles about promoting justice, equity, and compassion, and what that looks like. Sometimes it's easier for us to do that in terms of what it looks like in the world than it is among ourselves. In fact, I've discovered that most of you use, when you hear the word justice and social justice in particular, that's what we want to do, go straighten out all the wrongs in the world out there, the inequities we see based on, racial discrimination, economic injustices, and all of those kinds of things. But, compassion, equity, and justice, like most things, begins at home. So it applies to how we live with each other in the faith community as well. I remember reading some years ago the Roman historian Marcellus was his name. He wrote extensively during the Roman Empire's reign, and he wrote in the 2nd century. There was a note said, and this was the church in its early infancy, 2nd century. He said, "No wild beasts are so cruel as the Christians in their dealings with each other." During the last decade of my own ministry in the Presbyterian Church, my Presbyterian colleagues in Austin and around Texas were telling me that I should leave the Presbyterian Church, take my congregation and just leave, Lou, because you're not abiding with our new denominational policy that bans homosexual persons from being ordained into church leadership. You need to leave. They pointed out that our denomination had voted on that ordination issue, so I needed to abide by the rule of law. Have you heard that before? I need to abide by the rule of law in the church, regardless of my own conscience, my own theology, my own reading of the Bible. Nope. Presbyterians have long dealt with conflicts by putting the issue to a vote, and then the majority rules. We do things similarly. You use as well. Can you understand this point of view about settling disagreements over contentious church policies? My conservative colleagues in ministry, I learned, thought that a vote as Presbyterians on the ordination issue, my side lost. I needed to respect the rule of law. If I couldn't, I needed to leave. All of this is to say I've learned that conflicts among sincere and committed church members are inevitable in almost every congregation at some point in time. I have found that churches are very much like marriages, that even the best ones, you have to learn how to negotiate differences in opinions, difference in values, differences in the pathways we're going to take. That's why many faith communities like UU's have developed these so-called relational covenants to guide us when we find ourselves, I think at times, in conflict with one another about whatever. I believe those covenant agreements have been designed to help us navigate towards justice and equity and compassion when conflicts occur among well-meaning and devoted people of faith. One of the discoveries I made early on in my ministry, working with married couples, I was asked often to help sit with married couples who were having problems in their marriage, and they wanted someone to be a third party and to listen and to help them resolve their difficulties and disagreements. And I learned early on that it's no good to try to determine who's at fault and simply point that out. Even the messenger will get shot. There are blind spots that exist in every marriage, and they often arise because marriages are based on what? Love. And you know what love is? It's a deep feeling. If you don't believe that, I was going to sing for you this morning. Mariah Carey, I Can't Live Without You. Then I went, well, wait a minute, I better sing Michael Bolton, How Am I Supposed to Live Without You? And then I even went over to Barry Manilow, I Can't Smile Without You. Many of us have gotten into marriages on the basis of love. To deal with the inevitability of marriage conflicts and to instill what I think is a little realism into marriage and love relationships for that matter, the Christian tradition early on began to emphasize that marriages are based on promises, on commitments, on pledges, on vows. Ever paid any? I don't know if you were married, have been married or not, but if you've ever paid attention to marriage vows in the Christian tradition, you know what's being asked of the individuals. My daughter called me when she was going to get married some 25 years ago and said, Dad, Chad and I are going to get married, and I was looking at the marriage services. I want you to do the service. But I looked through the Presbyterian marriage service, and I discovered nowhere in there we get to say to each other that we love one another. I said, wow, Amy, you're pretty astute. I'm glad you're my daughter. I don't think I've heard many married couples or couples wanting to get married ever saying that to me or noting that, but you're right on. The church learned early on that marriages are based on commitments held together by promises and vows, not just feelings of affection. They recognize feelings of affection can dissipate, erode, change. It's got to be something stronger than just a feeling or a romantic feeling of love. Good marriages are a relationship sustained by things like honesty, mutual regard, and sometimes thick skin, rather than romantic feelings. Can I get an amen to that? There's been one or two people married. So what sustains healthy relationships, marriages or in congregations? No, in congregations, it's not a capable minister, although that will help. It's not adequate financial support, although that might be necessary in some respects. It might not even be good policies and procedures, although those are very, very important. The best I have found, and the healthiest congregations, recognize that we must pledge over and over again to deal with one another with justice, equity, and compassion, particularly when our feelings get intense. Many times when we hear this UU affirmation about the centrality of justice, we think of social justice, as I said earlier, but justice really is a relational term. People seeking to live in right relationships with one another and with the natural creation. From a scriptural point of view, I think rather than from a legal term, justice means loving our neighbor as we love ourselves and giving what is due to one another. So what's due to another person? Respect, honesty, trust. Ooh, that's a hard one. Most of us here, I think, today appreciate that UU tradition places a high priority on justice. Consequently, social justice is what we say compels us here to take action in the world around us, confront evil, care for the vulnerable, to make right in our social structures and institutions anything that's wrong or unfair, harmful, or deadly to others. But many people, however, justice is primarily this legal idea that implies personal responsibility and fairness before some law. This aspect is certainly a part of at least the biblical tradition and definition, but doing justice does not mean giving unfair advantage to some people over others. I've discovered that an aspect of this biblical idea of justice, at least, we sometimes create a false dichotomy that we're talking about individuals, how we relate, rather than how we relate as a community. It's not an either or. It's a both and. Our choices both benefit and harm others. Injustices arise often out of this tangled web of relationships that we weave and consequently touches everybody in the society or in the congregation. It's a relational posture, justice is, about being loved and gracious and generous towards one another. This morning I want to suggest to you finally that there's one dimension of justice that many spiritually minded folks don't seem to recognize, or maybe we simply don't emphasize it much anymore. At least I don't hear it said very often. Years ago, we used to actually hear a word. There was a word frequently used in churches because it connected affirmations about justice in relationships. That word is mercy. Mercy. St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the early church thinkers, claimed that way back when that the church needed to think carefully about its spiritual roots, and he said, mercy without justice is the mother of disillusion. And justice without mercy is cruelty. The early church suggested that in the most contentious relational moments that we have, whether it's in a marriage or whether it's in the church, we must remember to extend mercy to one another. That's hard to do. The unique character of mercy asks us to go beyond adjudicating disagreements and simply looking at evidence and deciding what's fair and who wins. Mercy is extending kindness and forgiveness to those who we have every right to hold responsible and accountable for their actions. Embodying mercy in fractured relationships particularly is extremely difficult emotionally and spiritually. Maybe that's why we don't hear that word used very much anymore. Have you ever seen mercy at work? I have. Some 20 years ago now, I was invited to join a group of Presbyterians who went down to the Texas-Mexico border to address immigration issues. We got in a passenger van. We drove the long trip down to Laredo. We were invited to meet with a family from Guatemala who were trying to find work to keep from starving. They wanted to be here simply to work. So the question was, would our church presbytery sponsor them to help them get the legal means to come into the country to get a job? On the way down, we were talking about what to expect, and there was one elder businessman member from one of the large churches in Dallas in the van with us. And I remember in the conversation, he started talking about, well, those people are just going to be taking jobs away from Americans. Have you ever heard that? You let too many of them come in, and then they'll want health services, then they'll want education. And he was worried. I was a little nervous about this guy being in this conversation. We get there, they introduce us to the family, we're sitting in a room, we're trying to hear their experience and stories. He's sitting in the corner in the chair like this. And I thought, uh-oh. And then family had a 3-year-old little boy, didn't speak a word of English. He drifted across the room to where this man was sitting. He crawled up into his lap, took him by the shoulders and smiled at him. And mercy broke out. When that meeting was over, guess who was the first person to suggest we should sponsor that family? I saw Mercy just the other night on TV. I was watching a PBS special. Claude Got Shot was the name of it. It's a documentary about a young 30-something-year-old African-American man, father, husband, in law school, going to visit a friend, pulls up in the friend's front yard, goes to get out of the car, and suddenly, by the driver's window, before he can get out, there's a young 15-year-old African-American boy with a gun that shoots him in the face. The bullet shattered his jaw, came out the other side. He went in for the next 3 or 4 years with 10 surgeries to try to repair the damage, hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical bills. That boy got shot by another carjacking victim who happened to have a gun. He ended up being paralyzed. But this father, husband, law student with his wife who was a lawyer pursued the case. They got the boy convicted, he said, in fairness and in justice. He needed to be held responsible. And then something happened. As he got learning a little more about where that 15-year-old teenager had been living and what his situation was, this man who had been shot, the victim, decided he wanted to be a part of a possible restorative justice conversation. So he went and found someone at Marquette University who was leading a project to bring together victims and perpetrators of crime so they could sit together and talk. Camera was there to video that conversation. You know what I heard in that conversation? Loud and clear. Mercy. That's what I heard. This seems particularly true when we're dealing with conflicts one another, that we have to ask ourselves, so where's mercy? We need it right now. Mercy is trusting that others will also be seeking to live out of justice, equity, and compassion, even when we disagree with their viewpoints and we disagree with their decisions. So I hope you will be on the lookout around here for mercy to show up among us when any of us ever get our noses out of joint with one another. Living out of compassion and justice is always challenging, but I believe it's nearly impossible in a church without justice. Before we have the chalice extinguishing, I want to pick up on what Corinna had shared with us in the Wonder Box today. As many of you know, we now have a transgendered minister with us part-time, and that brings about some questions about changes in habits and ways of thinking. And so one of the things that we need to recognize is this congregation has been committed to being a welcoming and inclusive congregation since the time I've been here, going on 10 years. We affirmed that for LGBTQ people 10 years ago. That's one of the reasons I'm here. Now we're being asked to think more broadly, to extend this welcoming, open mindset to transgendered people. So to that end, the Texas UU Justice Ministry is encouraging all UU congregations in the state of Texas to participate in what's called transgender inclusion training. Transforming Hearts Collective is the title. This is a 6-session online course. You don't have to come to anywhere. We will be doing this together as a congregation. The date has not been set when we will start this, but it will be 6 independent sessions. There's information about this in the back, why we should do this, who should participate, which I believe is all of us, and how there's a sign-up sheet. You can put your name on there to get more information about when it will be. The board has already decided to commit $400 to cover the cost of this. We will be asking simply for a $10 donation. We've discovered in churches that if you don't have any skin in the game, sometimes you don't participate real well. So we ask you to put $10 in to help support the cost of this program. But we want to start this sooner than later for obvious reasons. That we need to learn how to be welcoming and inclusive towards transgender person. I hope you will pick up the information in the back, read it, and sign your name on the sign-up sheet today. We have more chances next week to do the same, but we want to introduce that today and ask you to consider that.